now we're going to switch gears, and we're very pleased to be joined by Jonathan Rex, a Cherokee author and scholar living in Krakow, Poland. Welcome, Jonathan, and tell us about your background.
In the English language, my name is Jonathan Rex. In Cherokee, or the Cherokee language, it's Yana Uga Wayuhi. I was born and raised on U.S. military bases in California and the Philippines. And I knew that my mother was Cherokee, but when you're actually raised on military bases, the military culture is your culture. So I grew up with the military brat subculture. I'd say 22. I started looking more into my Cherokee background and learning more about my Cherokee ancestors through my mother's side.
Well, definitely your heritage is so interesting, and you descend from a Cherokee leader named Dragging Canoe, who's famous for taking on the colonial Virginians in 1775, just months before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Explain.
My mother's father is the descendant of Chiyu Ganasini, or Dragging Canoe, and several other people. And they often talk about the American Revolution began with the Boston Tea Party. But in truth, the American Revolution began with Daniel Boone, Colonel John Sevier, and Richard Henderson attempting to purchase the Kentucky lands for the banking firm of Isaiah Isaacs and Jacob Cohen. And at the Treaty of Sycamore Shoals, Chiyu Ganasini, or Dragging Canoe, stood up and basically declared war on the Virginians. And he also went against Aconostota, who was the war chief at the time, and he went his own way and basically said he was defecting from the Cherokee temporarily, and the Cherokee ended up following him, some of them, and he declared war on the Americans, or the colonial Virginians. And this was in 1775, 3 months before the Declaration of Independence. So in the Declaration of Independence, it refers to the merciless Indian savages unleashed upon the frontier by King George III. This is a direct reference to Dragging Canoe and his followers. And they formed the first Pan-Indian Confederacy and led the first American Indian War from the native side.
And what's even cooler is your discovery that Dragging Canoe's daughter married a man who was a descendant of the well-known secret Jewish Bassano musical family of Venice. Talk about that coincidence.
We come from his daughter Amasa Yekansin, who married a man named Thomas Chandler. And through Thomas Chandler's direct male line back to Jamestown, we come from John Chandler and Elizabeth Bassano. John Chandler was born in London, and he was baptized at St. Margaret's Cathedral in Westminster Abbey in 1600. And he was one of the first, one of the youngest children brought over. Well, when he got older, he ended up marrying Elizabeth Bassano. Elizabeth Bassano arrived in 1616, and she was from the Bassano family of London. They were musicians, or royal musicians, to the court of the king. Her father was Ludovic Bassano, her grandfather was Alvise Bassano, and her great-grandfather was Maestro Hieronymus Bassano of Venice. She was the first Jewish woman in colonial America, so in Jamestown colony.
Wow. And similarly, let's talk about Pocahontas. She's more than just a Disney character. Explain the connection between Pocahontas and your Bassano ancestors.
Matoaka, or Pocahontas, was at Jamestown, and she was a child at the same time that John Chandler arrived. So her and John Chandler were in the same small community, very small community, as children. Very likely that they played together. And then she went to London with her husband, John Rolfe. Pocahontas is believed to have been invited to a Shakespeare play and several performances with the Queen. And she left in 1616 at the same exact time that Elizabeth Bassano was arriving in 1616, but there's a few months between it. So it may have been, it's very possible that Elizabeth Bassano met her in London, and it was Matoaka who convinced her in the court to go to Jamestown.
Just incredible. And you've done a lot of research yourself. You've written academic papers about the shared history of the Cherokee and the crypto-Sephardic Jews. Explain how the word Cherokee itself is evidence.
With the Sephardic Jewish people fleeing the Spanish Inquisition, they would have been referred to as the Ani-Yawia. And the Ani-Yawia, or the Yahweh people, mixed with the Ani-Ketua, which were the Ketua people. But the word Cherokee, for whatever reason, was placed on maps. And it was spelled Cherokee, Chalakwe, and different variations of Cherokee. And when the British saw these maps, they referred to the people as Cherokee, but the people never actually referred to themselves as Cherokee. So I went into linguistics a little bit of the Hebrew language to try to find out, could there be a Hebrew root to the word Cherokee? Because none of the historians actually know where the word Cherokee comes from. It's not a Cherokee word. It would have been spelled on the maps, RAKIA, but the French and the British would have read it as a ch sound. So they pronounced it Charakia, but it was actually should have been pronounced Harakia, and it would have meant mountain life in the expanse, mountain life in the firmament, or mountain life in the heavens. And it's appropriate because the Cherokee have always been associated with the mountains.
Jonathan, your grandmother sadly passed away very recently, but please share the lasting legacy of your grandparents and even your grandfather, who was instrumental in the liberation of Dachau.
When Dachau was liberated and the reprisals were carried out, it was a man named Jack Bushyhead, who retired a captain, and the other person was my grandfather. And it was two Cherokee men who carried out the reprisals with between 300 and 500 Nazi Germans who tried to surrender, being executed. When he came back from the war, he just went back to work in the factories. He didn't really talk too much about military life at all.
Wow, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time.